Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
One evening, a girl named Nereus came into the study of her father, who declared that she would marry a duke instead of her sister. When the girl heard this, she was so surprised that she didn't even believe his words at first. But the father told his daughter that she was very modest, and with the kingdom at war, it was better to marry as soon as possible. Nereus was incredibly excited and realized that her father, if he was talking about it, he would definitely follow through. He asked that she should not do any silly things and be obedient, but then suddenly the girl interrupted him and asked him to listen to her. She wondered if the man he was going to marry her to wasn't a perfect match for Catherine's sister. Nereus also said that she had, after all, just recently come of age and was about to enter the academy in order to build her future in some way. In a trembling voice, she also added that her father had definitely agreed to it, and she had hoped to go there very soon. But the man couldn't stand her words and slapped his hand on the table, telling her to shut up, because an academy during the war was out of the question. He wondered if she really thought it was so easy to marry in wartime, much less a duke. She should be incredibly happy and grateful to be so fortunate, for it was a great stroke of luck. After calming down a bit, he sat back in his seat and said that the reason he had allowed her to go to the academy was for the sake of the family business. However, now because of martial law, they have lost that business, and now she definitely doesn't need an education because there is absolutely nothing to lead after death. His assistant came up to him and handed him some papers. The man told his daughter to listen carefully. In signing them, he said that the situation in their home had been very difficult recently. The Duke, who is aware of their situation, is the first to negotiate the marriage. She has no dowry, so they are soon given a large sum of money to support their business. As he looked at his daughter, he wondered with a smile on his face why he should even pass up such a great opportunity for the sake of some education of hers that even she would not need later in life. Without letting her say a word, he also added that certainly, as she had said, this Duke was meant for Catherine, but the North was too harsh for her sister. He asked Nereus if she really wanted to jeopardize her sister's life and send her there. Her father said that this marriage would not only benefit their family, but also herself, for she would finally be able to be useful to them all. So he told her not to complain in any way and to get ready to go north, for the matter would not be discussed again. After this conversation, she walked out the door and was very upset. Nereus walked past the maids, who stood around and squinted at her. When they saw the sad expression on her face, they immediately realized that she must have already found out about her wedding. But the maids were not at all surprised by this kind of reaction, for they understood what kind of man this was, the infamous Ghost Duke Daffod. This man quite rarely attends social receptions, and when he does appear there, he always wears a strange mask so that no one in the capital did not recognize him. He gives off an incredibly murderous aura, which is why everyone tried to avoid him when he attended noble events. Not only that, but the fact that he didn't get along with the king at all caused quite a lot of inconvenience to the people. In fact, the reason why the Duke is going to war is just to get rid of him. It was a terrible thing to enter such a family, so the maids felt incredibly sorry for Lady Nereus. But as the girl passed them, one of the maids told her to be quiet and not to talk so loudly about it, for it was none of their business at all anyway. Nereus, when she returned to her room, she saw many workers packing all of her belongings into various boxes and suitcases. The girl was already depressed, and this picture was killing her. She immediately ran up to one of the maids, asking why they were collecting all her things. But the maid, removing her hand from her shoulder, explained that my lord had ordered that the lady should depart for the northern dominions the very next day at dawn, and she had been told to pack her things in advance. Nereus, hearing this, couldn't believe it was true. She didn't think it could happen so quickly, for she had thought it would take longer. She was so surprised because she had only recently learned of this engagement, and now she was about to be sent away. She started yelling at the maids again, asking them to stop, because she would talk to her father again, and he would probably change his mind. But at that moment, some girl came into their room. She turned to Nereus and asked why she was crying so loudly and raising her voice. As soon as she turned toward the person who had entered, she immediately saw Sister Catherine in front of her. The girl ran her hand over her tear-stained eyes and said that a lady should always remember her dignity and set an example of nobility. Then Catherine glimpsed at the maids, who were still packing at that moment, and asked that they leave the room. The maids were very surprised at this and told Miss that they still had to pack up all the things in order for the master not to scold them for it. When Catherine heard this, she was immediately angry. She looked them straight in the eye and asked if they hadn't heard her. They need to leave now because that's what she's asking. The maids were immediately frightened by this tone, so they ran out the door and apologized to the miss, saying it would not happen again. Then Catherine stepped closer to her sister and grabbed her hands and asked her why she always had to be told twice in order for her to understand. She sat her sister down in a chair and asked her to relax a bit and wondered what was even going on with her. Catherine explained her suspicions by saying that the girl was behaving unusually. Nereus looked away from her and said she didn't understand why she had to get married all of a sudden. She wondered if the Duke had not proposed to her. When her sister heard these words, she looked at her sympathetically for a while. Nereus also told Catherine that she needed to talk to her father and tell him that it was all a big misunderstanding. However, the girl, when she heard those words, was very surprised and asked if she really wanted to send her to the north. Catherine, smiling wickedly, told her sister that she knew she was the center of the capital's social life, after all, and asked if she really wanted to be sent to the north, where you can die of boredom, because nothing happens there. Catherine wondered if she really thought that made any sense. Nereus could barely hold back her tears and turned to her sister and said that she should have gone to the academy, not married some duke. The girl took her hands in her own and said that she knew that, but the academy is in the north, so it's not a problem. Catherine moved closer to her and told her that there was a department of magic there after all, and wondered what magical academy she was going to go to, since it wasn't the northern one. Nereus answered nothing to that. Then her sister took her hands off her and said they should stay on the subject. Catherine wondered how she could study magic when she was completely incapable of anything, and yet she was the one who should eventually become a duchess. Therefore, the girl thought it was a great privilege for her. Looking at her sister, who was feeling very uncomfortable, she wondered if maybe she should just try to woo this duke. After all, maybe he would like her enough that he would even send her to the capital's academy. Catherine sighed and said that she would certainly have a hard time, for she was not as beautiful as her sister. But if she tried hard enough, she would be able to do her best. With that, the girl walked out the door, slamming it shut behind her and leaving poor Nereus alone with her troubled thoughts. Then the girl couldn't stand it after all and stopped holding back her tears. She began to cry because no one understood her, and her sister always thought she was better. And so a whole week had passed since that moment. Nereus had been on the road all that time, for, as expected, she set out at dawn the next day. The girl had not expected to have to travel so long, and was surprised that it was so far to the north. As she drove through the afternoon, various silly and intrusive thoughts visited her head, so by all means she tried to drive them away from her. Nereus realized that she couldn't think about the bad, because whatever it was, she was already in the duchy, and she had a great opportunity to make a fresh start. The girl believed that despite the fact that it was an engagement and forced, she did not intend to break it, because her family had always laughed at her and humiliated her. And that was why this was Nereus's only chance to get away from those monsters who had absolutely no respect for her. And so some time had passed since then, and the girl had finally arrived at the manor. As soon as she stepped outside, she immediately thought that things would change from now on, and assumed even for the better. The old self she was going to leave behind, the one who was forever ignored and not considered a person with her own opinions and desires. Nereus was going to be a completely different person from that moment on, someone who would be respected and regarded for her point of view. As soon as the girl opened the doors, she immediately began to walk past the garden that was located near the manor. The flowers that grew on the sides were just unbelievably beautiful, and she hadn't expected it could be so beautiful in that part of the empire. As soon as the girl turned her head to the side, she saw a familiar face in front of her. A woman's voice boomed near the flowers and said she didn't know there could be such beautiful flowers in the north. After that, the girl came closer to her and asked Neris why she was the one who suddenly stopped and scolded her for being late. The girl looked at her in surprise and couldn't believe that her sister was really standing in front of her. She asked Catherine what she was doing up north. Her sister turned to her and said that she knew very well that it had been quite a long journey and she must be tired, so she suggested that she sit down and rest. They had already entered the manor at that point, and Catherine told her that this was her room for a while, and also added one piece of advice to her, that a girl should not walk around the manor late at night. She sat her sister down on the bed and wondered if it was true that this room was just fine, and it was indeed. It was quite spacious and bright. Catherine replied that it was much better than she had ever expected. Neris interrupted her and asked her sister what she was even doing in this place. The girl looked at her indignantly and asked if she was really asking what she was doing here, and explained what the marvelous ducal castle represented to her. Neris interjected that she was even saying that, for she remembered perfectly well that the girl had said that it was too boring in the north, so she wouldn't want to go there. She immediately wondered why Catherine had suddenly started praising the place so much. Her sister was very angry that she was asking her so many questions. With a heavy sigh, she answered her sister that she had simply changed her mind. After all, she was the one who had been engaged to the Duke, so she had asked Nereus to give her back her place as a bride. When the girl looked at Catherine, she was very surprised and said that the engagement was really no joke. She said that the only thing that confirmed an engagement during the war was the magic paper, and the letter had already been signed, so it already had her very name on it. So Nereus explained to her sister that this engagement could no longer be broken off, no matter how much she wanted to. But Catherine, smiling, bowed and said that she was prepared to demonstrate one very important thing, especially for her. So she asked her sister to be silent and watch carefully. Then the girl curtsied and pretended to speak to her husband. She said hello, giving her name, and also added that she was the lady who was engaged to the Duke of Duffid. Catherine inquired if the engagement letter had already arrived safely. Then she looked surprised and asked if her sister's name was on the letter. The girl, waving her hand, said that it was probably her father who had made such a mistake. As the eldest daughter of Count Tafen, she apologized profusely and did not understand how such misunderstandings had occurred. Catherine said that her sister Neris would be arriving very soon. She had been so alarmed when she learned of her sister's wartime engagement. But she also added for the man not to worry, because she will be back home in 2 days, so everything will be fine. Seeing her sister's surprised face, Catherine said that she had explained the whole situation to the butler, so the girls had absolutely nothing to worry about. Nereus, angry, began to shout at her sister and asked if she really thought the Duke would believe such a ridiculous story. After all, if he realized that everything was completely wrong, their family would become the laughing stock of society. She explained that the Duke would never divorce for such a ridiculous reason, and she would not allow their family to become a laughing stock in plain sight. Neris ran up to her sister and grabbed her hands and told her that she hadn't wanted this engagement from the beginning after all, and so she didn't understand why the girl had changed her mind so quickly. But Catherine grabbed her hands and started squeezing them hard and said that was why she was asking for her help. It was because of all this that she was going through all this trouble, and part of her wished she could turn back the clock even further. But she told her sister that there was nothing she could do about it anymore. The time allotted to her was up, so she should stop arguing and help the other way around. Catherine moved closer and closer to the girl, telling her that the place was originally hers, so she had no right to claim it. Neris was even startled by the sight of her sister before her and wondered what was even going on, as well as why she was doing this. Catherine shoved her sister in the shoulder so that she fell on the bed and said that she was really sorry and also not happy about the situation. But it would be much better for everyone, in her opinion, if Nereus actually did as she said. With that, the girl turned around and started to walk away. Before closing the door behind her, she said that she had her father's permission to do this and go to the academy so she could just go home in peace. Then she looked at Nereus and wondered in an angry voice if she was only acting this way because she wanted to be a duchess. For the last time, Catherine said she didn't think so and closed the door, slamming it behind her. Nereus was left completely alone with her thoughts. The girl had thought up to this point that it was already over, and even when she left home, her family still wouldn't let her go and continued to torment the poor and unfortunate girl. Nereus couldn't believe that she would never be able to escape her family. She didn't know for sure. She realized she didn't even want to think about it, because it was all so hard. At this very time, as night fell, the Duke returned to the manor using his magic power. He was immediately met by the butler and greeted the Duke, saying that he must have had a hard day. The man looked towards his servant and wondered if something was wrong. He had blood on his face as well as on his clothes. Norman, who was the servant of the manor, replied that there was a problem with an engagement that had taken place some time ago with the Earl of Tofany's family. The butler said that he had signed his bride's name incorrectly. When the Duke heard this, he was very surprised, but said nothing in reply. Shortly thereafter, he went into his office, washed the blood off his face, and changed his clothes. He immediately began to examine the papers. It said that his fiancée was Nereus Tofana, but as the butler said, the letter was a mistake written while drunk, and the eldest daughter initially agreed to the engagement. Then the man tossed the paper aside and said he really didn't care at all who it was. The Duke explained that he was already very fed up with this pathetic family. And in fact, he really didn't see any difference between the daughters, so he wasn't going to sort it out. After a while, someone suddenly knocked on his door. The Duke was immediately alert. He did not think it was Norman, for he did not usually knock on doors so late. The man realized that there were no other visitors in the place, so it must have been the young ladies from Tofana County. But the man was very displeased, for he knew that Norman had told them not to wander about the castle at night, and this annoyed him very much. He thought these girls had a complete lack of manners, so he opened a drawer that held his white mask to hide his face. The room continued to be knocked on. Then he went to the door and decided to see who was there after all. He was going to see the faces of those same ill-mannered girls from the wretched family. So, opening the doors, he stepped out into the hallway and saw the blonde girl banging her head against the door. He immediately and seriously wondered what she was doing. That girl was Nereus, and she didn't say anything back to him, just kept banging her head against his front doors. The Duke watched her for a while and asked her what was the matter with her in the first place. When she didn't answer that question either, he put up his hand so she wouldn't bang her head again. He turned her face closer to his so she was looking at him, and asked what she was doing. When he saw her sleepy eyes, he was very surprised and couldn't believe that this girl was really sleepwalking. Duke didn't understand how she could fall asleep and end up going all the way up to the 4th floor of the manor to stand there banging her head against the wall. It was amazing to him that she had made it this far and was completely unharmed. But he thought she would have trouble getting back to her room, for she must be disoriented in a new place. Sighing heavily, he realized there was nothing more he could do, so he picked her up in his arms and apologized for such inconvenience. The girl was still in a dreamlike state. However, when she felt someone pick her up, she immediately started fidgeting and as if to wake up. Duke explained in a quiet voice that he was just trying to get her back to her room and advised her to hold still if she didn't want to fall down the stairs. The girl was silent for a while, and then said that she was asking for the Duke. The man was a little surprised and asked if she was Nereus. Nereus began to wake up and confirmed that it was indeed her. The man smiled and said he was honored that she could answer even in her sleep, and asked if she was his fiancée. Nereus confirmed in a quiet voice that it was true. However, the man replied that her sister claimed that the engagement was just a mistake and that Catherine would be his wife. The girl did not respond to this. Then he wondered if she really didn't want to give answers to uncomfortable questions. By then they had reached her room, and he, laying her down on the bed, heard the answer. She said that she really did not want to give answers to such questions. It amazed him how she could even process information and respond in her sleep, so he said that was pretty smart. He then covered her with a blanket, said goodnight, and left back to his office. And so the night passed. Neris woke up in the early morning when the sun began to shine directly into her eyes. The girl looked around sleepily and realized that she had not been able to figure out where she was for some time. But soon she remembered that she had arrived in the duchy the previous evening. Then she remembered her sister who was going to take her fiancé away from her and make her look guilty. Neris didn't understand, even after a night, why Catherine had suddenly changed her mind and why she was so reluctant to go north. But the girl soon came to the conclusion that she didn't care at all about the reason. She wasn't going home ever again. She realized this when she left Count Tophane's house. For the rest of her life, she would be under the rule of her family and have no interests of her own. It will just be a tool they can throw away anytime they don't need it. Neris walked over to the kettle of cold water on the dressing table and poured it over her head. A little refreshed, she realized that she didn't want to go along with their desires. She didn't care about the engagement. She had her own dreams and ambitions to fulfill. She was no longer going to indulge her family. Soon afterward, the butler escorted her to breakfast. Her sister was already seated at the table, who, seeing Nereus, indignantly said she was late again. Continuing to eat her salad, Catherine said that perhaps she was tired after her long journey. But still, in someone else's house, she should observe decorum and be polite. Smiling, she also said that this wasn't their home after all, but the castle of her fiancé, His Highness Duke Daffod, and she needed to be more punctual next time. Neris said nothing to that, but only looked at her sister with a look that was filled with hatred. She walked over and sat down across from her so that she could eat breakfast as well. Catherine was silent for a while, and I told them to forget it, because she was leaving the estate tomorrow anyway, so we don't have to worry. Catherine, sighing heavily, said that she was sorry she wouldn't be able to stay with her in the north, and wished her luck with getting into the academy when she got home. But Nereus interrupted her half-heartedly and told her that she wasn't going home at all, but was going to the Northern Academy. Catherine, on hearing this, was very much surprised, and the girl went on with her story, saying that her sister had been delighted to tell her about her, so she immediately set about studying it. Juan Neris said that the Northern Academy had produced so many outstanding scholars and mages, and when she learned that such a place was nearby, she realized one very important thing, namely what she most wants to study in this wonderful place that has so many opportunities. That was why she had made the decision to stay in this place. So with a smile, she told Catherine that she had absolutely no reason to be sad. For a while, the sister looked at Neris angrily, and afterward, pulling on a false smile, she said that she thought the girl wanted to be trained in magic. That was also why the girl had insisted on studying at the capital academy all along, and had even convinced her father to do so. Catherine said that her passion for magic is all she has after all, and she can't just give up her dream just to stay in the north. Neris was a little confused. However, she realized that she should not back down because she had expected it. She would have to speak confidently, stick to her thoughts and arguments in order to win this fight. Then the girl, with a smile on her face, explained to her sister that her passion for wizardry was undying, so she decided to take this opportunity to learn even more things. She explained that there were many faculties at North Academy, which she also liked very much. So she told her sis that North was a wonderful place full of opportunities, and she had no intention of leaving. Catherine was furious. She slammed her hands on the table and asked her what she was up to, and how dare she talk like that. But the girl had no time to finish the last sentence, for the butler intervened in their conversation, and apologizing, said that this was a pretty wise statement. He immediately introduced himself and his position. Norman said that listening to Lady Tophane's words made him proud of the North, and he thanked her for saying so. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and wanted to say something to him, but the man interrupted her. Because she called him butler, he asked that she feel free to just call him by his first name. Neris, smiling, immediately said that in that case she would do so, and Catherine, who had been silently watching all this happen, was simply puzzled. She didn't understand what had even happened. After all, this butler had always been incredibly intimidating and sinister, but towards her sister, he was incredibly kind. Catherine immediately realized that at this rate, Neris could even steal the Duke out from under her nose again. But she was determined, and she wasn't going to give him to anyone, because he was her person and her place. She wasn't going to let anyone take him away from her like she had in her miserable past life. In fact, Catherine Tofana has always been perfect, even from the beginning. She had such charm that absolutely everyone could love her. People even liked to call her a cute little bud. And she wasn't the only one called Lady Tofana. There was also Nereus Tofana, her sister. That's what her sister was called too. As soon as she was born, Catherine immediately realized that a ghost was worse than a ghost, worse than the truest demon. She immediately assumed that her sister wanted to take what was hers. However, she had no intention of giving her anything ever. Catherine once won a poetry contest, and her father, immediately seeing the diploma, began to praise her. Catherine replied that she had labored specifically for their family, and the man, stroking her head, said it was very thoughtful of her, and afterward inquired how he could not give his eldest daughter a gift of pride. After that, he took out a small item, saying that it was a magic tool with special powers. She should keep it with her at all times, for it could save her in a time of need. When Catherine saw the watch, she was very surprised, but she thanked her father from the bottom of her heart. The man said with a smile on his face that he was very happy that his eldest daughter was already doing so much for the family. And afterward, he turned to his other daughter, frowning, and asked what her bottom line was. Nereus, holding the test she took behind her back, said she got the highest score in math. However, her sister immediately interrupted and turned to her father and said that this time she wanted to participate in the capital flower arrangement contest and asked if he would mind. The man, upon hearing this, immediately said that it was a very big opportunity, and if she won there, everyone would look up to her when she made her debut in society. He said his eldest daughter was very perceptive and completely missed what Neris had told him. Soon after that conversation, Catherine and her sister walked out into the hallway. The girl looked sadly at her math test. She was very hurt that her father paid no attention to her at all. Then she turned to Neris, seeing her sad and concentrated look, and taking the sheet from her, asked what it was she was looking at so intently. When she saw her results, she suddenly laughed out loud and asked her sister, "Is this what she's trying to get praise for?" She thought it was a very pathetic and completely useless achievement. Nereus asked in a quiet voice for her sister to give her the piece of paper and told her that she wanted to give her some advice. No matter how many times she came in first place, she would still be worthless for the rest of her life. And at that very moment, she took and ripped her math test into little pieces right in front of the girl's eyes. Nereus couldn't understand why her sister had done that to her, but Catherine turned around and told her to remember that advice and always follow it. Afterward, she looked at her gift that her father had given her and thought about how her sister should know how worthless she was, and she, on the contrary, was wonderful. Catherine believed that she could covet what was hers. However, she could never get what she had. And she was going to give her sister a good showing in the future, so she thought she should look forward to it. Despite this promise, however, Catherine ended up letting Nereus take absolutely everything away from her. In fact, Catherine's misfortunes began with her engagement to the Duke of Duffid. He turned to her and she was so stunned by his sudden suggestion that she didn't even believe it right away. Catherine has become a beautiful celebrity in the capital's social circles. And now she is to marry the Ghost Duke, about whom there are so many strange rumors. To her, it was something terrible. She thought it was ridiculous, because there were rumors that he was at odds with the king, and in order to calm the king's nerves, he made an alliance with a noble family in the capital. And in fact, this man was one of the main links on the battlefield. When Catherine's father heard the news, he said he was very concerned about it. His daughter, sighing heavily, said that it would certainly be difficult to refuse with the Duke's fortune, but she wouldn't even want to do that, since he had a pretty decent amount of money in his account. However, she didn't want to marry him, so for a while Catherine didn't know what to do. But soon she had a brilliant idea in her head. She was going to marry off her sister, who always loses to her, in her place. Catherine thought that this way she could get rid of her once and for all. Besides, Duke Daffod might even die in the war with the West, for it was rumored that he had been mortally wounded in the last battle and was in a very serious condition. So Catherine felt that all she had to do was get her hands on all of his possessions before he died. The girl felt that she should insist that the marriage vows be made as soon as he returned from the battlefield for the engagement. She wanted to accomplish this as quickly as possible, for after his death, his wife, namely Nereus, would receive the inheritance. Catherine believed that if they could manipulate her, all the wealth would eventually become their family, so she was sure this was their last chance. So she turned to her father and asked him why he should not arrange this engagement of Nereus to a man. When he heard this, he was very surprised and asked if she really wanted to do it. But Catherine, smiling wickedly, said it was a great chance. After all, if he did it, their family could profit handsomely from it. She asked him to trust her and do as she said. Catherine was very glad that she was finally able to take care of both the engagement and her sister, so she believed that there would be no more obstacles in her life. Her future was filled with nothing but bright light and hope. However, this choice turned out to be the biggest mistake of her life. When she learned that the war had been won thanks to Duke Daffod, he was even awarded the Empire's first Hero Medal. The king said that now that their kingdom had become an empire, and they were on good terms with the Duke, they could expect the Duke and Duchess to appear in social circles. People around kept talking about how Lady Tofana must be incredibly happy since her sister, the Duchess, and the Duke had such a wonderful event. Catherine always talked about how she was, of course, overjoyed, but it wasn't really like that at all. All people called Duke Daffod and Duchess Nereus, and her sister thought it was just ridiculous and ridiculous. She didn't understand how it was even possible. And when Catherine saw him for the first time, she knew immediately that he was completely different from the rumors. This man was so masculine and charming. All the people also said that the Duchess is incredibly beautiful. She is sweet, and at the same time full of grace. They were the stars of this ball, and people were all happy to be able to be at the same event as these people. Catherine could not stand 5 minutes of such praise, so she ran out the door, for she realized that the man was originally hers. The most perfect man in the world, the position that everyone admired and envied, it was hers, so Catherine was to be the mistress of it all. She believed that Nereus had ended up stealing everything from her, and because of this, Catherine fell into great despair. She remembered that terrible day many times and eventually became a drunkard. Her father, who found out everything, secretly married her off to an old marquis in the West for a large sum of money. And when the girl realized the whole situation, she fell into a new despair. Catherine thought that at this rate, this scoundrel would abuse her for the rest of her life. So the girl felt that for her own good, she must escape. One night, she put her plan into action. Catherine fled among the mountains and kept blaming her sister for all her troubles. She thought her life had been ruined because of Nereus's greed. The girl knew she couldn't stop, and in the end she was so absorbed in her thoughts and worries that she didn't even notice the cliff ahead. She ran so fast that she began to fall downward at full speed. Catherine couldn't believe she was going to die like this, but she didn't want to die more than anything because she knew she deserved a better life. She grabbed her father's watch and said she needed another chance. Catherine asked that someone give her another chance at a happy life. She wanted back what was originally hers, what her sister had taken from her, and in the end the girl did move on to a new life. But even there, Catherine didn't understand how her sister dared to take what belonged to her. whether in her past life or her new one, and so decided to rebel against her. But Catherine didn't understand what had gone wrong. Her sister hadn't been so arrogant before, and she didn't know why Nereus was acting so differently. She even assumed that her sister had realized that she had somehow managed to reincarnate into a new life, but quickly dismissed those thoughts, for she thought her too stupid for that. Catherine figured this girl was just acting a little differently, but she herself was blessed with this marvelous instrument that had been a gift from her father. And so Catherine still had an advantage over Nereus, so this time she was going to get the Duke herself and not let her sister take him. At this time, after breakfast was over, Nereus returned to her room and was incredibly tired. She hadn't realized that a meal could be so tiring, but the girl suggested that it was probably all because she had rebelled against her older sister for the first time and started to stand up for herself. Nereus was well aware that she was going to be in a lot of trouble over this until the Duke returned, and she would have to stand up to her sister the whole time. She didn't know if she could even last until then. Shortly afterward, someone suddenly knocked on her room, introducing herself as Emma. This girl said that she had come to deliver a message from Lady Catherine. When Nereus heard this, she was very much surprised and asked, "Did it really come from my sister?" Then she began to walk slowly toward the door and thought about the fact that surely Catherine must be trying to do some kind of mischief again. So as she slowly opened the door, she saw Emma in front of her and immediately wondered what her sister had said to her. The maid handed her the letter and told her that everything she needed to know was in there. She could read it now and send a reply at once. Nereus took the envelope, but she couldn't figure out what her sister was up to. As soon as the girl opened the letter, she immediately began to read it. There, Catherine addressed her sister and said that at breakfast she noticed that her table manners and social etiquette were simply terrible. That was why she said that from the next day the girl should join her at breakfast so that she could teach her everything. Catherine must teach her right now, so that she would be less embarrassed in the future when she met her fiancé, namely the Duke. So she asked that her sister be sure to come to the next breakfast. At the end, she also wrote that her sister was very concerned about her well-being. Nereus was very surprised by such a letter and couldn't believe that it was really Catherine who had written it. She reread those lines for a while, her hands beginning to tremble, and she realized that she was doing this to her again, assuming it was all because she had dared to answer her. Nereus realized at that moment that Catherine would never change. Ever since she was a little girl, if she didn't listen to her, she'd tell her father, and she'd be scolded for it. She made her go to parties and purposely make the worst mistakes and make her the object of everyone's jokes. Nereus couldn't take it all quietly. She had to constantly apologize to her sister, even though she hadn't even done anything wrong. But the girl believed that it was because of her weak character and because she was too pathetic that all this was happening. However, now that she looks back, she realizes full well that it was just bullying from her sister. But at that moment they were not in their home, and Nereus mistakenly thought that Catherine would not bully her anymore. But the girl proved too confident. However, even with all of this, she's not going to let her sister bully her the way she used to. She doesn't want it to ever happen again. So, rereading the letter once more, the girl turned to Emma and said she would be sure to come to breakfast. She also asked that the girl tell Catherine that she was looking forward to this breakfast and was anxious to get a lesson in good manners from her. The Duke, who was taking a shower at this moment, realized at once that the sisters must not be getting along very well with each other, for the butler had already told him all the news. But the man also resented the sisters arguing in the castle without his master, and it showed their rude behavior as well as their insolence. Then Norman bowed and said that Lady Tophane's second daughter was apparently very favorable to their estate. She was also going to enter the Northern Academy, and from what he had heard, she was also interested in magic. So the man wondered if maybe the Duke should talk about it sometime when he was officially already back at the estate. But the man, angry, turned to Norman and said that it was only an engagement out of necessity and meant absolutely nothing to him. That was why he felt that the butler should not attach much importance to this engagement either. The man, bowing, said at once that he would bear it in mind, and also begged his pardon. When evening came, the man was sitting in his office, as usual, working on some papers. He wrote for quite a long time, and then suddenly, in the middle of the night, he heard a strange sound again. Listening more closely, he immediately realized that the sound was exactly the same as the night before. Duke assumed it was probably her again, so putting on his mask, he went outside to make sure. And when he went out the door, he immediately saw Nereus in front of him, banging her head against the door again in her sleepy state. With a heavy sigh, he said that it must have been her. No doubt he'd known it was her, but he hadn't expected her to be able to make it as far as the 4th floor again that night, as if she'd memorized the moves. He really hoped the girl wasn't going to act like this the whole time she was at the manor, because it was pretty embarrassing. He was silent for a while, and then, sighing heavily, he said he didn't even know what to do. But then, turning to the sleeping girl, he said he would take her back to her room for starters. The man came close to her again and, taking her in his arms, led her into the bedroom. After that, he slowly and gently laid her on the bed. He was pleased enough that she hadn't woken up in the middle of the night again this time, but he realized that this girl could be quite the troublemaker. The Duke realized that if this did go on, they would only put each other in a very awkward position. He would have to inform Norman of this, but before he went back to the war, so that now the butler would see to it. However, at the moment when the man was about to leave, he suddenly felt something strange. Turning to the side, he saw that the half-asleep girl had suddenly grabbed his arm with a contentedly firm grip. He really hoped it wasn't what he thought, because the man wouldn't want her to wake up and see him in her bedroom. But after standing immobile for a while, he noticed that she lay back on the bed, but nevertheless continued to hold his hand. He exhaled with relief and thought about the fact that she hadn't woken up, only reflexively grabbed him in her sleep. He was actually quite surprised by this, but slowly began to let her hand go from his to walk away. The Duke considered himself lucky to have been able to move her into the room, but realized that if he continued to touch her in any way, she would probably wake up. And if she did, he would have to explain the whole situation, and it would be very awkward. They would end up in a very awkward position. So he didn't let her hand go from his and sat down next to her on the bed, deciding that he would just wait for a while. The man thought that perhaps she would soon sleep better, and then he could leave. The man also hoped that if she continued to sleep, when she opened her eyes, she would remember absolutely nothing and move on with her life. He'd be fine with her thinking it was just a dream and not giving it much thought. But then suddenly he heard her gentle voice telling her not to do it. Nereus was saying that what she'd done was really wrong, and she realized her mistake. The girl, through her sleep, turned to her sister and asked her to forgive her, for she felt terrible because of how much she had suffered. The girl even cried. The man didn't say anything or react in any way. He just sat silently watching. Nereus continued to cry and apologize to her sister. The Duke couldn't understand why she was so worried. He suggested that it was probably because of the quarrel Norman had told him about, that she could not even calm down in her sleep. However, he thought it was just a normal sisterly quarrel that was completely irrelevant, but apparently it wasn't what he thought. Catherine suddenly started squeezing his hand even harder. Then the man took her and told her to calm down because he was the only one in the place and she shouldn't apologize. He spoke in a quiet voice, trying to reassure her that everything was fine and she hadn't done anything wrong. So he asked that she not cry. Soon the girl was indeed able to calm down and let go of his hand. Then the Duke was finally able to free himself at last, and as he left the room, he wished her pleasant dreams. The next morning he arrived at his military battalion, and as soon as he entered his tent, he was immediately greeted by one of the soldiers. The man said hello to the commander and said he was very happy to see him again. David immediately turned to him and inquired about the situation of the enemy last night. The fellow, whose name was Hartman, answered at once that nothing remarkable had happened, so that the night had passed even quietly. When the Duke, with a very serious expression on his face, said that in that case he was calling a strategy meeting. The next morning, when Neris woke up quite early to be in time for breakfast, she immediately opened the window to launch the pleasant morning scents into the room. The girl had dressed herself in a very formal look rather quickly and felt that should be enough. She looked very pretty and didn't know if she should add anything else to her outfit to be proper. In fact, this was the first time Neris had put clothes on herself in a very long time, so she didn't know if she was even good at combining all those colors and shades. Emma had originally come to the castle with her as her personal maid. However, then Catherine also appeared in the estate, so Emma immediately went to her sister, and the girl ended up being left completely alone. Certainly Emma was her maid when they were at home, so it makes sense that she went straight to Catherine's house when she arrived. Neris had been feeling just awful lately about how her sister had always somehow bothered her, but she decided she shouldn't get so upset. The girl walked towards the exit and thought about the fact that she would be dating her very soon, so she needed to keep her emotions in check. Taking a few deep breaths, she walked out the door, all the while wondering what her sister was up to this time. As soon as the girl opened the door, she immediately heard a loud scream from the maid who was passing by. She fell to the ground and scattered all her things in a circle. The maid began to touch her head, which was beginning to hurt badly, and wondered what she had hit her head on in the first place. Neris was very frightened for her condition, so she immediately approached the maid and asked if she was all right at all. The maid apologized to the miss, saying she wasn't looking where she was going, so she was very guilty. The girl looked surprised as she stepped closer to her and asked why she was the one apologizing at all, since she was the one who had fallen, and Neris. She began to remove the towel from the maid's head and inquired if she was badly banged up and asked if she could even stand up. The maid was very surprised at this behavior, but said that she was actually fine. When the girl heard that, she exhaled with relief and said that it was very good. She started picking up those things that were scattered on the floor and said that she was really sorry. She was just thinking about it, so she didn't look around. The maid immediately rose to her feet and asked that Miss not pack her things, for she must do it herself. However, Neris smiled happily and said that it was okay. After all, she was the reason she fell, so she offered to pick it up together. It would be much faster that way. The maid was very surprised, but still agreed to this alternative and thanked Mistress for it. Neris immediately said she needn't thank her, for if it hadn't been for her, the maid wouldn't have fallen. She also said she had a lot of laundry and wondered if it was too much for her to carry alone. The maid, smiling happily, said it was no big deal, because she usually lifted things much heavier than this laundry basket. The girl wondered if this was really the case and also asked for some examples. The maid, as she continued packing, said that, for example, she very often moved heavy groceries in the kitchen or moved furniture around the house on her own. So this little basket of laundry doesn't seem heavy at all. Neris was very surprised to hear this and said it was amazing. She then asked if all the other maids were as strong as she was. She replied that she didn't know for sure because maybe she was just special. When all the laundry was collected, the maid thanked Miss again for her help and apologized for bumping into her. But Neris insisted and said she was the one who should apologize, and in parting advised the maid to take care of herself. Shortly afterward, the girl went at once to the dining room. She was escorted there by Norman, who opened the door. As soon as Catherine saw her sister enter, she indignantly said she was late again. The girl, pointing to the table, said that she had promised last night to be on time after all, and wondered how she could keep her older sister waiting so long. Catherine was dressed in a variety of jewelry that directly sparkled on her body, and said that punctuality is a very important trait in social circles. So she advised Neris to be a little more punctual next time. The girl looked at her sister from head to toe and wondered where she had gotten the jewelry and clothes, as she had never seen them before. Catherine immediately looked at her sister and said that it was all the Duke had given her, for in time of war you can't travel with a lot of luggage. And considering this, the girl decided to use the traveling magic circle and arrived at this place in no time. So they prepared it all especially for her. Catherine turned to her sister and said that since she was the guest of honor, she too could take advantage of all the comforts they were providing. Smiling, she asked, since Nereus didn't think they were very kind people. The girl didn't know what to say to that, for she was still stunned by her sister's appearance. She really couldn't believe Catherine had said that and dressed so provocatively, for it was completely contrary to everything she had said before. Nereus was finally convinced that her sister had lost her mind. Catherine followed her surprised gaze and immediately wondered if there was something wrong with her face. The girl immediately replied that this was not true at all, and the sister in turn explained that in such a case it was very impolite to stare without taking one's eyes off someone's face. She also added that if a girl makes a mistake, she should politely apologize, otherwise her social reputation will be ruined. Catherine also said that she was incredibly bothered by the fact that the girl doesn't even have basic manners and doesn't know all these simple rules. She also added that Nereus had said she would be going to Northern Academy, so she asked that the girl be careful when choosing a major and not change her mind without thinking things through. When Nereus heard those words, she immediately realized that learning manners was just an excuse. Catherine had asked her to eat with her only to humiliate her further. The girl thought about the fact that her sister hadn't changed at all, but things wouldn't be the same because it was herself who had changed. Nereus was no longer going to play the idiot who believed every word she said. So she said with a smile that was very sweet of her, but Catherine didn't have to worry about that. She explained that she would be going to North Academy to catch up on her reading, and as she had said last night, North Academy had many useful faculties. It really is the perfect place to learn a lot of new things and learn anything your soul desires. Catherine was immediately angry and said she was glad the girl thought so, and inquired what department she was going to enter. Nereus replied that she was thinking of taking the entrance exam for the accounting department because she was absolutely confident in her knowledge of math. At that moment, the butler, who was just putting out food for the girl, came up to them. He listened to their conversation and was very surprised. Norman looked at the girl and asked if she was good at math and loved it. Nereus looked at him and smiled and said that this was indeed true. She did math at home and read a lot of theoretical books. Butler replied that it was very wonderful and would like to say that His Highness the Duke is very generous in supporting talented people who really love their work. When she heard this, she was even a little embarrassed, for no one had ever called her talented or praised her before. But Norman confirmed his words and said that His Grace was eager to find talented people to develop his estates, and those who received his support were improving their skills as northern officials of the Duke. That was why he advised her to keep it in mind as well. When she heard this information, she was overjoyed, because she did not think it was possible to receive such generous support for her projects. She knew at once that this was exactly what she needed. So Nereus got up from the table and turned to her sister and said she would go first because she had to go. Catherine heard this and was very indignant. She asked her to wait, for the girl hadn't even touched her food yet, but her sister didn't want to listen to her. Nereus said she suddenly had a very important job, so she might not even have to wait for her for lunch and dinner, and thanked Norman for telling her such useful information. The butler smiled back at her and told her that he would definitely support her and hoped she would do well. At this very time, the Duke was in the military camp discussing with his colleagues some very important information regarding the battle. One of the warriors said that many are saying that the forces of the West are on the move again. They are out of time, so they must strike first. The other warrior agreed with him and said that now that they were weakened was a good time to hit them. All the people thought that they should go on the offensive and show more action. However, Daphid, hearing all this, said that he did not understand how they were going to do it. The man explained that they were outnumbered and unarmed, and their mages still hadn't recovered from the last battle, so he didn't know how they were going to attack with absolutely nothing in their arsenal. The man looked at those warriors who were so vehemently advocating the idea of an offensive and asked them to tell how they were going to do it. The man answered nothing, of course. They even felt ashamed that they had raised their voices at all. Then the Duke turned to his assistant and inquired when the resupply would end. The man immediately replied that it would be in 2 days. So David asked that they increase their observation of the enemy lines and start preparing their knights for battle immediately. He then turned and began to leave, saying that this was all so that they would be ready to fight at any moment. When the man left the tent, the aide immediately followed him and sighed heavily, not realizing what all the other warriors were whining about. He said he believed the victory in the last battle made them very impatient, for it had been quite a struggle. But the Duke replied that the war was lasting much longer than they thought, so all the warriors were already impatient and would like to end it all sooner. He explained that it had been a long time since most of them had been home and seen their families. The assistant, hearing this, immediately agreed and said that this was indeed the case, and then asked if that meant he would be alone in the barracks again. The Duke replied that he still had some work to do, so he should stay. They walked in silence for a while, and then the aide said that he was alone so often and asked that the Duke think of him for a moment. He has to fight off doctors and commanders at night because of him. David looked at his assistant with a smile and said that he was certainly thinking of him. After all, his abilities made him feel comfortable, and he was incredibly grateful for that. The man was at once very pleased by this and wanted to change the subject. So he asked how the Duke's engagement was going, for he had heard that Lady Tofana was quite famous in the capital. He also asked if the Duke had ever seen her, and if he liked her, at least in appearance. The Duke answered nothing, but wondered what she was like. In fact, he could only see her at night, so he doesn't know what kind of person she is at all. After all, they don't even talk. She's a sleepwalker. He had quite often wondered what kind of person Neris would have been if they had met during the day. He himself assumed that she was contentedly intelligent, but also ignorant. But if he did not look at these qualities, he replied that she was like the sky. The aide, hearing this, was very much surprised and asked what the Duke even meant, for how a man could be like the sky he did not understand. Duke explained that she was like the sky, completely unpredictable with blue eyes. At this very moment, Nereus was sitting in her room at her desk writing down some papers. She actually got into that department for the sake of magic and the future of this country, so she wrote that on her application for them to consider her. The girl didn't understand why she didn't know about this wonderful opportunity much earlier, because generous support was exactly what she needed. If she could show the Duke what she could do, she could even attend the academy on his dime, and she wouldn't have to spend her own money. And if she ends up graduating from the academy with a better score, she could become an official in the House of Duffied. So this was the biggest chance for her. But then she suddenly thought about the fact that if she ended up becoming a northern official, she would have to see her sister Catherine often. Of course, she was completely disinterested in this engagement to the Duke from the beginning, and her sister wants to be a duchess. Nereus even wondered if she would leave her alone after that, though she concluded that the girl would still bully her all the time. But she decided that it didn't matter at all and thought about dealing with it a little later. She had more important things to deal with now. But then suddenly someone knocked on her room and asked if he could talk to the girl. Nereus was a little surprised that someone had decided to come over, but she agreed, so she immediately walked over and opened the door. She saw Norman in front of her and immediately wondered what had happened. The butler bowed and apologized for the inconvenience, but said he would like to show her the new room. The girl was a little surprised at this, but immediately followed him. Soon they passed into a very luxurious and spacious room with blue furniture. When the girl looked around, she was genuinely surprised, for this room was incredible. Oh, and besides, it was much warmer than even her previous room, although that room had been just fine, too. Nereus wondered if everything seemed different because the furniture was made of special wood, or if the room had a special heater. Suddenly, Norman turned to her and immediately asked if she liked it. The girl immediately turned in his direction and said that she really liked it and thanked him for providing such a beautiful room. But then she wondered why he had suddenly moved her to this place, since her old room was pretty good too. The man said he was actually very ashamed to admit it, but he realized too late that her old room was too cold. To make up for the inconvenience he had caused, he had given her a better room and hoped she would like it. When the girl heard about it, she was very surprised and said that she had never really been uncomfortable, so she asked that he not take it all to heart. The butler really liked this girl, so he smiled and said that it was very kind of her. At that moment, another person suddenly came into the room and told the butler that he had brought lunch. Norman, turning to leave, immediately told her to come in. He then turned to Miss and told her that there was someone he wanted her to meet. Nereus didn't even have time to listen to him and said that this girl was the laundress, and it was true. The maid bowed and greeted her mistress, saying her name was Jean. The girl explained that she had been appointed her personal maid from that day forward, so she would fulfill her every whim. Nereus immediately ran up to her and told Jean that she was incredibly happy that things had worked out this way. The maid also replied that she was glad to be her maid too, for it was a great honor for her. Suddenly the butler intervened in the conversation. He was a little surprised and dumbfounded, so he asked if the two of them already knew each other. Nereus, smiling, replied that she had made a mistake that had almost gotten Jean hurt badly, so technically it was her fault. The man laughed and said he was clear. Then he went to the counter with a dish and asked Jean to prepare dinner. The maid immediately followed him and said she would be sure to fulfill everything. But at that moment, Nereus suddenly looked somewhere to the side and saw something interesting. She went to the place at once and wondered wonderingly what this door was, for she had never seen it before. The maid immediately replied that there was really nothing special and there were definitely no secrets. It was just a decorative door. Norman agreed with her and explained that it had been there since before the castle was built. When the girl heard this, she was immediately interested because this place was really amazing, and she had never seen anywhere else put up decorative doors before. When night fell, the Duke returned to his estate again and sat in his study, reading a book to relax a little before going to bed. He had read that patients who sleepwalk are better put to sleep than awakened. This did not surprise him at all, for it was exactly what he had expected. He should do nothing to avoid making things worse. But at that moment, he heard some strange sounds outside again. The man immediately put the book aside and went to check. And as soon as he opened the door, a girl immediately came at him. He managed to grab her just in time so that she didn't fall to the ground. The Duke, smiling, wondered if she was having a severe anxiety, but Nereus was asleep and heard nothing.